Okay, what are the differences between negotiations that affect the negotiation process? Well, to start with, we have to look at what is a negotiation, which we define for as being a communication process between parties who have some perceived misalignment of interest or objectives, or there's a conflict at place. So with that being said, the parties believe that they can better their position by undertaking the negotiation process. Now they do that in the context of the scenario that exists, right? Part of that context includes the individual differences between the negotiators and the differing characteristics of the negotiation scenario. All right, oftentimes we call those constraints, right? So what are those specific differences? I just want to identify them. So for the negotiation planning process, it's easier to focus in on them as part of the strategizing and planning and practicing process. So to start with, the nature of the conflict or dispute at hand is going to change between negotiations, and that's rather obvious. Oftentimes the interests or objectives between the parties will differ, or at least there will be a perception that the interests of the parties are differing, which is not always the case, especially in negotiations where you have many interests at stake at the same time. One party perceives there's a misalignment of interest, and ultimately both parties come out worse because they're not able to align their interests for the betterment of both parties. And then you're going to have individual differences such as the cognitive effects of the individual. What is the party's logic? What is their philosophy? What emotions are at stake, or individual perceptions of the situation or the other party are at hand? These are personal characteristics that come from anything from prior experience, background. It can also be aspects of the individual's specific disposition. What is their general outlook on a situation? Do they have particular prejudices, aversions, that type of thing? And then there's the scenario, the constraints on the negotiation process by the external characteristics not related to the individual, such as, the geography, where the party's located, okay? What languages are being spoken? Is it the first language of all parties, or are there lingual differences that will come into play? Cultural aspects, such as closeness of space, time preferences, that type of thing. Are there any time constraints or pressures on the negotiation? Is there a deadline? Anything like that. Negotiating in groups or as a team can be different than negotiating individual to individual, and can also be a contextual constraint. Agency relationships. Usually this is where one party is acting on behalf of another. There are knowledge issues, investment issues, control issues there that all come into play. And then there's the medium of communication. Communicating through electronic resources can be different or more difficult than communicating face-to-face. And there's a whole wide array of electronic resources whereby the communication method or ability is in some way constrained. So these are the differing aspects that affect the negotiation process, and these are things that we're going to address throughout this negotiation series.